Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Books and Mortar podcast with me, your host Rizia, where we talk about the books that build us. This episode we're heading to London. Not the London of Buckingham Palace and red telephone boxes, not the London of your tourist brochures, but the London of forgotten rivers, ancient grudges, ghost stories, and magic hiding just beneath the surface. This episode, we're talking about Rivers of London by Ben Aaronovitch. So before I picked up this book, I had heard it described as Harry Potter for adults. I don't know if that's entirely accurate. For one thing, according to one of the characters in this book, Harry Potter is just fictional, and this is a harsh reality that I have to come to terms with every single day. But Rivers of London is an urban fantasy, and it's an urban fantasy wrapped around a murder mystery. So it begins with a murder, not a subtle murder either, not a locked room murder or poison. No, someone gets their head knocked clean off their body. So the police arrive, they take one look at the victim, and they conclude that because his head is no longer attached to the rest of him, this was probably not an accident. Which brings us to our protagonist, Peter Grant. So Peter is a probationary police constable. He's clever, observant, and he's endlessly curious, but not always in ways that his superiors appreciate. And on the night of the murder, he gets assigned to guard the crime scene in Covent Garden, which is not exactly exciting work. At least that's what he thinks. Then a witness appears. The witness claims that he saw the whole thing. Two men passed each other in the street. They nodded in greeting. One put on a red jacket, pulled out a stick, and knocked the other's head off. So that's already pretty unusual, right? But according to the witness, that wasn't the strangest thing. The strangest thing was that after the murder, the killer's face changed. Now, if you were Peter Grant, that's quite a statement to hear in the middle of the night. If you're Peter Grant, it's even more surprising when you're told that your witness is a ghost. His name is Nicholas Walpenny, and he has apparently been dead for quite some time. And it was at this point that I had a feeling I was probably going to enjoy myself through this book. And Peter reports all of this to his colleague Leslie May, right, who also happens to be his secret crush. So this follows a career review where Peter discovered that instead of being assigned to something exciting, he's been handed a desk job. And to make matters worse, Leslie gets assigned to a murder investigation team. And when Peter complains, Leslie tells him that he's actually not a very good policeman, but naturally Peter disagrees. So her argument is that he's always distracted. Instead of focusing what's on directly in front of him, he's always reading signs, noticing bits of architecture, getting sidetracked by interesting pieces of history. And this kind of criticism, it follows him throughout the novel. But it's also one of the reasons why I like him so much. He absorbs information, he notices things, he asks questions, and he gets distracted because he's curious. And I think curiosity is his defining trait. And there's a moment here where Peter reflects that life is probably about as good as it's ever going to get, which is sad. He talks about running away from home as a child, only to realize that eventually he'd have to come back. And when he goes looking for Nicholas Walpenny again, he assumes he won't find him. So Peter doesn't really expect things to change, which makes what happens next all like the more satisfying. So against all expectations, Peter escapes the drudgery of a desk job, and he becomes the apprentice of Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Nightingale. And Nightingale is an absolute mystery. He is effectively a one-man department. No one is entirely sure what he does, and no one really wants to ask him either. And as Peter soon discovers, what he does is magic. Real magic. Actual magic. The sort that leaves traces behind. The sort that can be studied. And that can be learned. So one of my favorite things about Peter is that he immediately starts treating magic like a science experiment. So Nightingale wants him to learn, but Peter wants to know why things work. He wants to test theories and change variables. And the father of modern magic, Peter discovers, was Sir Isaac Newton himself. So Peter may not be progressing as quickly as Nightingale would like, but I suspect his curiosity is eventually going to become one of his greatest strengths, because that's why he's taking so long, right? Because he's experimenting with all these different things. Because if there's one thing this book rewards, though, it's people who ask questions. Like why ordinary people are suddenly flying into violent rages, why people keep turning up murdered, why some of those murders seem to follow the line of the old Punch and Judy story. And why are there river gods living in London? Peter soon meets Mama Thames, Baba Thames, and their various children. He meets Beverly and Tyburn. He meets trolls, vampires, and assorted supernatural beings. And one of the things that I found most entertaining is how quickly Peter adapts to all of this, right? Like, he doesn't really question the existence of these things. Ghost, fine. River goddess, cool. Vampire, fine. Ancient magical conspiracy, all right. So Peter's reaction to having his understanding of reality completely dismantled is essentially, well, that's interesting. Maybe it's a British thing, maybe it's shock, but either way, it works, right? Then as the body count rises, Peter and Nightingale begin to suspect that something supernatural is possessing ordinary people and driving them to murder. Actually, the investigation leads them to the dark origins of the Punch and Judy story. So I'm not very familiar with the Punch and Judy story. I just know of Punch and Judy as characters, and presumably like children's characters. But I had no idea how disturbing the original story actually was, right? Punch murders his wife, he murders his child, a policeman, a hangman, eventually even the devil himself. It's really dark, like. And as the murders begin mirroring these events, Peter and Nightingale suspect that they're dealing with a revenant. A revenant is a ghost driven by revenge. And the name they eventually uncover is Henry Pike, an actor from centuries ago who was murdered before he could achieve the success he believed he deserved. And if there's one thing that Henry Pike is not willing to do, it's let it go. And one thing I really enjoyed, though, throughout the novel was Peter himself. So Leslie tells him he's not a good cop because he's easily distracted. But I'm not convinced, right? So he's maybe not the most efficient policeman in the world, but he's thoughtful, right? He's personable, he listens, he's good at conflict resolution. And there's a moment where he reflects that this is actually something he's better at than Leslie. And I found myself agreeing with him because he tries to understand people, even supernatural people. There's another moment when one of the river gods remarks that Nightingale's apprentice is not what he expected. He expected a dependable workhorse to be with Thomas, but instead he got someone cleverer and more cunning, more like the wizards of old. And that observation stood out for me because it feels true, right? Peter's greatest strength isn't his power, it's his curiosity. And that's what ultimately solves this mystery. So but one reveal that really caught me by surprise was Leslie's connection to the case, right? So looking back, because retrospect is always 20/20 vision, all the clues were there, right? She had access, she was present, she knew the plans, but I didn't see it coming. And what I found interesting was how much emotional weight that revelation carried for Peter, because by that point his feelings for Leslie had become very clear. And they weren't just romantic feelings, but they were protective feelings as well, and like feelings of loyalty. And there's a moment where he recalls helping reunite a mother with her missing child and describing the relief that he saw on her face. And he realizes that that's the closest comparison he can find for how desperately he wants to save Leslie. And if you're a parent, you'll probably understand exactly what he means. So through this book, though, one thing that surprised me was how little we actually learn about Nightingale. And when he first appears, I assumed he was going to become like this eccentric mentor figure for Peter. Like the ingredients are there. Peter has a complicated relationship with his own father. Nightingale offers him purpose, a future, and a home. And all the pieces are there for classic mentorship relationship, but the book never really develops it. And even the revelation that Nightingale is over 100 years old feels less like an answer than another question. And by the end of the novel, I felt as though I knew Peter quite well. I understood Leslie and Beverly. I even felt like I had a bit of a better grasp of the Thames family drama. But Nightingale remained a mystery. And maybe that was intentional. it's the first book in a long-running series, and I don't know, maybe, the author here is playing a long game with the character. But I did find myself wishing that we'd spent a little more time getting to know him. And in some ways, Peter then ends up carrying much of the emotional weight of the story himself. But he's able to manage it, right? And then we come to London, right? Because I think that London may actually be the main character of this book in a way. Ben Aaronovitch loves the city, right? Not the postcard version of London, the real version of London. The version that hides beneath the roads and the train stations and the office building. And this book is extraordinarily London. And that's it's a compliment and an observation, right? There's a lot of geography, landmarks, history, a lot of rivers. And if you know London well, I think that you'll get far more out of this book than I did. So I've visited London and I've walked some of the streets and I recognize some of these places. But even then, there were times when I felt as though I was floating down the Thames while somebody pointed out historical landmarks on either bank. So Ben knows the city and he loves London. And the rivers of London genuinely feels like a love letter to it. So where does this whole thing leave me? This was a bit of an unusual reading experience because I didn't love the book, but I kept reading it. It's not naturally gripping. It wanders and it takes detours, and sometimes I felt as though it was more interested in London's history than in the murder investigation. But there was always something there to kind of keep me going. I liked Peter. I enjoyed the humor. I enjoyed the magic. I eventually even enjoyed the river gods. And in the end, though, Rivers of London was a 3-star read for me. I enjoyed it and admired it, but I occasionally struggled through it. But I do suspect that readers who know London better will appreciate it more. Still, though, there was enough there to make me curious about what happens next. So I will be picking up Moon over Soho, but whether I continue beyond that, remains to be seen. And maybe by the next book, Nightingale will finally tell us something about himself. Maybe Peter will learn more magic than just a glowing ball of light. And maybe I'll finally figure out whether I'm on Mama Thames's side of the argument or Baba Thames's. But I think that's a family argument I'd rather stay out of altogether. But thanks for listening to this episode. This was Books and Mortar with me, your host, Rizia, where we talk about the books that build us. Until next time, bye.